The champagne flute slipped from my hand, shattering against my grandmother's Persian rug, as my sister Penelope stood in my Denver penthouse doorway and declared she needed my $8.7 million inheritance to pay for her wedding. Not borrow. Not ask politely. Needed. As if my late Uncle Garrett's life savings, left specifically to me after years of mentorship and love, belonged to her by some divine right of being the prettier, more popular Sutherland sister. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What happened next would expose not just her entitlement, but a decade-long conspiracy that had nearly destroyed my sense of self-worth. Before we continue, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow I've got something even more jaw-dropping lined up for you. The afternoon sunlight streamed through my floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Rocky Mountains, casting long shadows across my minimalist living room. I'd spent the morning organizing files for my architectural firm, Hartley Associates, a practice I'd built from nothing over 12 years. My coffee had gone cold on my drafting table where preliminary sketches for the new Boulder Museum expansion lay scattered, but I'd been too absorbed in my work to notice. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps that somehow felt aggressive even through solid oak. Penelope swept in without waiting for permission, her honey blonde hair perfectly styled despite Colorado's dry winter air, her designer coat probably costing more than most people's monthly rent. Behind her trailed our mother, Constance, wearing that tight-lipped expression I'd learned to interpret as suppressed disapproval directed at me, and our younger brother, Derek, looking uncomfortable in his usual position as family Switzerland. Natalie, Penelope began, not bothering with pleasantries, her voice carrying that imperious tone she'd perfected since childhood. We need to talk about Uncle Garrett's money. I'd received the inheritance notification 6 weeks ago. Uncle Garrett had passed away at 73 after a brief illness, leaving behind a fortune accumulated through decades of brilliant patent work in renewable energy technology. He'd been my father's older brother, but more importantly, he'd been my mentor, the one person in the Sutherland family who'd actually encouraged my architectural ambitions when everyone else insisted I should pursue something more feminine, like interior design or event planning. What about it? I asked carefully, already sensing this wasn't a condolence call. I hadn't seen any of them since the funeral 3 months ago, where Penelope had spent most of the service checking her phone and our mother had complained about the memorial's pedestrian catering. My sister positioned herself in the center of my living room like a queen holding court, while Derek perched awkwardly on my white leather sofa and Constance remained standing, arms crossed, near the bookshelf that held my architecture awards. Carson and I have decided on Aspen for the wedding, Penelope announced, referring to her fiancé, a hedge fund manager she'd been dating for 18 months. The venue alone is $400,000, not including the 10-day celebration we're planning. The flowers Valentina wants are flown in from Ecuador. The dress is custom Vera Wang. And mother's insisting we need to host at least 200 guests to maintain our family's social standing. I stared at her, genuinely confused about why she was sharing her wedding budget breakdown with me. Penelope had always lived extravagantly, funded primarily by our mother's family money and Carson's considerable income. My architectural firm was successful, but I lived modestly, reinvesting most profits back into the business and my employees' benefits. That sounds expensive, I managed, unsure what response she expected. It is, Constance interjected, her voice clipped. Which is why we've come to discuss the inheritance. Garrett's money should be used to benefit the entire family, not hoarded by one person for selfish purposes. The word selfish landed like a slap. My entire life, I'd been characterized as selfish whenever I pursued my own interests. Selfish for wanting to study architecture instead of staying local for college. Selfish for declining to work at Constance's event planning company. Selfish for buying this penthouse instead of something closer to the family estate in Cherry Hills Village. Uncle Garrett left the money to me, I said quietly, my architect's training in remaining calm during client conflicts kicking in automatically. He was very specific in his will. Exactly. Penelope's voice rose sharply. He left it to you, when I'm the one getting married. Do you know what people will think if I can't afford a proper wedding? After the Rothman girls' ceremony last month cost over $3 million, anything less would be embarrassing for our entire family. Derek finally spoke up, his voice tentative. Pen, maybe we should. Stay out of this, Derek, Constance snapped. Then, turning back to me, her expression hardened into something I'd seen countless times growing up, that particular blend of disappointment and disdain she reserved exclusively for me. Natalie, you've always been difficult. Different. You've never quite fit with family expectations. But this is your chance to finally do something meaningful for this family. Penelope deserves a beautiful wedding, and frankly, what do you need $8.7 million for? Your little firm is doing fine, isn't it? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My little firm. I'd won 3 regional design awards last year. My sustainable housing project had been featured in Architectural Digest. I employed 15 people whose families depended on the business I'd built from scratch. But to Constance, it would always be my little firm, something I did to occupy myself until I presumably came to my senses and settled into appropriate feminine domesticity. I'm not giving Penelope my inheritance, I said, the words emerging more forcefully than I'd intended. Uncle Garrett left specific instructions. Uncle Garrett was a senile old man who let you manipulate him. Penelope shrieked, her composure finally cracking. Her face flushed red, and for a moment she looked genuinely unhinged. You always sucked up to him with your boring architecture talk and your fake interest in his stupid patents. You strategically positioned yourself to steal money that should have been divided among all of us. The accusation was so absurd, so divorced from reality, that I actually laughed. A short, shocked sound that seemed to infuriate Penelope further. I loved Uncle Garrett, I said firmly. We talked every week for 15 years. He mentored me through architecture school, attended every one of my project unveilings, helped me understand sustainable design principles. Our relationship wasn't strategic, it was real. Then prove it wasn't about money, Constance interjected smoothly, using that manipulative tone I'd fallen for too many times in my youth. If you truly loved Garrett and care about this family, you'll do the generous thing. Think of it as an investment in Penelope's future happiness. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. At 32, just 2 years younger than me, Penelope had never worked a day in her life. She drifted through a communications degree at a private college, spent her 20s traveling and attending charity galas, and now dedicated herself full-time to being Carson's fiancée. Her Instagram boasted 50,000 followers who admired her curated life of luxury brunches and designer shopping hauls. And she genuinely believed she deserved my inheritance for her wedding. No, I said simply. The answer is no. The silence that followed felt dense, heavy with years of family dynamics I'd never fully understood but had always felt crushing me from above. Penelope's perfectly made-up face contorted with rage. You selfish bitch, she hissed. After everything this family has done for you, this is how you repay us? By hoarding money you don't even need? What exactly has this family done for me? The question emerged before I could stop it, years of suppressed frustration finally finding voice. You've criticized every choice I've made. You've diminished every achievement. You've made me feel inadequate my entire life for not being the daughter and sister you wanted. That's not fair, Derek started. It's completely fair, I interrupted, something breaking open inside me. And I'm done apologizing for being myself. The inheritance is mine. Uncle Garrett wanted me to have it. End of discussion. Constance's expression turned cold, calculated. I see. Well, Natalie, you've made your position very clear. I want you to know that this decision will have consequences. Family loyalty means everything, and you've just demonstrated you have none. They left in a fury of slammed doors and muttered threats. I stood alone in my penthouse, surrounded by shattered glass and the fading scent of Penelope's overpowering perfume, my hands trembling as adrenaline finally caught up with shock. What I didn't know then was that this confrontation was just the opening move in a game I hadn't known I was playing, a game with rules established long before I'd been old enough to understand them. And the truth waiting in Uncle Garrett's lawyer's files would reveal not just why I'd received the inheritance, but why my entire life had felt like swimming upstream against a current designed specifically to drown me. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay in my king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling's architectural beams I'd specifically designed when I renovated this penthouse 3 years ago. Every structural choice in this space had been intentional: exposed ductwork painted matte black, polished concrete floors, floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the mountains like living artwork. This home was my sanctuary, my ultimate design statement, proof that I could create beauty on my own terms. Now it felt contaminated by Penelope's entitlement and Constance's cold manipulation. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and moved to my kitchen, brewing strong coffee while Denver's city lights twinkled below. The confrontation replayed in my mind with uncomfortable clarity. Not just today's events, but patterns I'd spent decades trying to ignore. How Penelope had always received extravagant birthday parties while mine were small family gatherings. How Constance had flown to Paris for Penelope's college graduation but claimed she was too busy to attend my architecture school commencement, even though I'd graduated summa cum laude. How Derek had learned to stay neutral, neither defending me nor challenging the family's obvious favoritism, because taking sides meant becoming a target himself. I'd told myself it didn't matter. That I'd built a successful life independent of their approval. But standing in my kitchen at dawn, I recognized the truth I'd been avoiding: their constant dismissal had shaped me in ways I'd never fully acknowledged. Every achievement felt hollow without validation. Every success felt like it needed defending. I'd become so accustomed to being the family disappointment that I'd actually started believing I was somehow deficient. My phone buzzed with a text message, startling me from these dark thoughts. It was from my business partner and closest friend, Jasmine Chen. Wait, no, I couldn't use that name. It was from my business partner and closest friend, Rowena Mitchell, the only person outside Uncle Garrett who'd consistently believed in my capabilities. Saw you were active at 3 a.m. Everything okay? Emergency design crisis or personal catastrophe? Rowena had co-founded Hartley Associates with me 8 years ago, bringing her structural engineering expertise to complement my architectural vision. She was brilliant, direct, and possessed an uncanny ability to read my moods even through digital communication. I called her instead of texting back. "It's 4 a.m., Nat," she answered without preamble, her voice rough with sleep but alert. "What happened?" "My family showed up yesterday," I said, surprised by how my voice cracked on the word family. "Penelope wants my inheritance to pay for her wedding." A long pause. "Then, I'm coming over. Put on more coffee." 40 minutes later, Rowena arrived in yoga pants and an oversized University of Colorado sweatshirt, her dark brown hair pulled into a messy bun. She took one look at me and pulled me into a fierce hug that finally broke through the numbness I'd been maintaining since my family's departure. "Tell me everything," she commanded, settling onto my sofa with the coffee mug I'd prepared. I walked her through the entire confrontation, including details I'd been too shocked to fully process during the actual event. How Constance had called my architectural firm little. How Penelope had accused me of manipulating Uncle Garrett. How they'd presented their demand as if I was morally obligated to fund my sister's excessive wedding. $8.7 million, Rowena repeated slowly when I finished. She wants nearly $9 million for a wedding? Not even to start a business or buy a house or fund medical treatment, for a single day's party? She genuinely believes she deserves it, I said, hearing the bewilderment in my own voice. Like it's incomprehensible that I wouldn't just hand it over. Rowena set down her coffee mug with deliberate precision. "Nat, I've known you for 12 years. I've watched your family treat you like an afterthought at every company event, every holiday gathering we've hosted. But this is beyond typical favoritism. This is financial abuse territory." The term startled me. "That's extreme." "Is it?" she challenged. "They're demanding money that legally belongs to you, threatening family consequences if you don't comply, and framing your completely reasonable boundary as selfishness. What would you call it?" I didn't have an answer. Rowena leaned forward, her expression intense. When was the last time any of them attended one of your project unveilings? When did Constance last ask about your work with genuine interest? When has Penelope ever acknowledged your accomplishments without qualifying them somehow? They're busy. Stop. Rowena's interruption was gentle but firm. Stop making excuses for people who've never made excuses for dismissing you. Your mother flew to New York last month for a gallery opening. Penelope posts Instagram stories from brunches 3 times a week. They're not too busy, they're deliberately excluding you from their definition of family importance. Her observations landed with uncomfortable accuracy. I thought about my last birthday 3 months ago. Penelope had posted elaborate stories about Carson surprising her with a weekend in Napa, but hadn't even sent me a text. Constance had called 4 days late with a perfunctory, happy belated birthday, before launching into complaints about Derek's girlfriend. Uncle Garrett never forgot, I said quietly. Every birthday, every project completion, every small achievement, he remembered and celebrated with me. Exactly, Rowena said. Which is probably why he left the money specifically to you. Did his will include any explanation? I nodded slowly, moving to my home office where I'd stored the inheritance documentation. The folder sat in my filing cabinet, thick with legal papers I'd only skimmed through in the overwhelming weeks following Uncle Garrett's death. I pulled out the file and returned to the living room, spreading documents across my coffee table. Rowena immediately began organizing them with her engineer's systematic approach. Will, trust documents, letter from the estate attorney, and something I'd overlooked before, a sealed envelope with my name written in Uncle Garrett's distinctive handwriting. You haven't opened this? Rowena asked, holding up the envelope. I forgot it was there, I admitted. Everything happened so fast after he died. The funeral, the will reading, launching the Boulder Museum project. I filed everything away to deal with later. I think later just became now, Rowena said, handing me the envelope. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the wax seal. Uncle Garrett had always been charmingly old-fashioned about certain things. Inside were 3 handwritten pages on his personal stationery, dated 6 months before his death. My dearest Natalie. If you're reading this, I've departed for whatever comes next, and you've received the inheritance that caused me considerable thought over the years. I suspect Constance and Penelope have already made their displeasure known. They've always been predictable in their entitlement. I paused, looking up at Rowena. He knew. He knew exactly what would happen. Keep reading, she urged quietly. I want you to understand why I've structured things this way. This isn't about favoring you over other family members, it's about protecting you from them. Your father, my beloved younger brother Thomas, was always the gentle one in our family. When he married Constance, I tried to warn him about her calculating nature, but he was desperately in love. After he died when you were 10, I watched Constance systematically undermine your confidence while elevating Penelope as the golden child. My breath caught. I barely remembered my father. He died in a car accident when I was young. Most of my memories were filtered through Constance's bitter narration about how his death had ruined her plans. I've watched you, Natalie. I've seen you achieve remarkable things while your own family treated your accomplishments as inconvenient disruptions to Penelope's spotlight. I've heard Constance tell people at parties that you're going through a phase with architecture, as if your award-winning firm is a hobby you'll eventually abandon. The money I'm leaving you isn't just inheritance, it's freedom. Freedom to build the life you want without financial dependence on people who've never truly valued you. Freedom to make choices based on your dreams rather than their approval. But I'm also including documentation that I think you should see. Information about family finances that Constance has carefully concealed. Your father left a substantial trust fund for you and Derek, meant to be distributed when you turn 25. Constance, as trustee, told you both that Thomas had minimal assets at his death. This was a lie. The words seemed to pulse on the page. Rowena leaned closer, reading over my shoulder. I've included bank statements and trust documents proving that Constance embezzled approximately $2.3 million from your trust fund over 15 years, using it to fund Penelope's lifestyle and her own investments. She's been counting on you never questioning her narrative about your father's finances. I've also documented the pattern of emotional manipulation, her systematic undermining of your confidence, her strategic isolation of you from extended family who might support you, her teaching Penelope to view you as competition rather than a sister. My dear girl, you've spent your life trying to earn love from people who view you primarily as a resource to be managed. I'm giving you these tools not for revenge, but for liberation. You deserve to understand the truth about how you've been treated, and why. Use this inheritance wisely. Build beautiful buildings. Design a beautiful life. And please, don't let their narrative define your worth. With love and pride, Uncle Garrett. I set down the letter with shaking hands. Rowena was already pulling up the attached financial documents, her engineer's brain immediately processing the numbers and dates. Holy shit, she breathed. Nat, this is criminal fraud. Constance literally stole your inheritance and has been gaslighting you about it for years. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Every childhood memory suddenly required reframing. Every time Constance had made me feel guilty for wanting things, architecture camp, study abroad, my first car, while simultaneously indulging Penelope's every whim. She hadn't been prioritizing Penelope because she loved her more. She'd been covering up theft with favoritism. My father left me money, I said slowly, testing the words. I wasn't the family burden Constance always implied. I had resources she stole. And then made you feel selfish for having normal needs and wants, Rowena added, anger clear in her voice. This explains so much about how they've treated you. They needed you to feel inferior so you wouldn't question the financial narrative. I thought about Uncle Garrett, how he'd always encouraged my independence, always celebrated my achievements with genuine enthusiasm. He hadn't just been a supportive uncle, he'd been deliberately counterbalancing Constance's systematic destruction of my self-worth. What do I do with this? I asked, gesturing to the documents spread across my table. Uncle Garrett says it's for liberation, not revenge, but your family just demanded your entire inheritance, Rowena finished. And they did it believing you'd be too conditioned to their manipulation to refuse. They miscalculated. My phone buzzed repeatedly, a group text from Penelope to me, Derek, and what appeared to be several family friends. Just so everyone knows, Natalie has refused to help with my wedding despite inheriting millions she doesn't need. I guess we know where her priorities lie. #Family Matters #disappointed. She's already starting a smear campaign, I observed with strange detachment. Rowena grabbed my phone, scrolling through the increasingly hostile messages appearing in various family group chats. They're not just asking for money, they're trying to socially punish you into compliance. This is coordinated. Something crystallized in that moment. Not anger exactly, but clarity. I'd spent 34 years trying to earn love from people who viewed me as fundamentally less valuable than Penelope. I'd minimized my own success, questioned my own worth, and apologized for taking up space. But I'd also built something remarkable. A successful firm. A home I loved. Genuine friendships with people like Rowena who valued me completely. And now, thanks to Uncle Garrett, I had both financial security and the truth about my family's systematic manipulation. I think, I said slowly, I need to talk to Uncle Garrett's attorney. There are questions about what legal options I have regarding the embezzlement. Rowena smiled. Now you're thinking clearly. Want me to come with you? Please. As dawn finally broke over Denver, painting my penthouse in soft gold light, I felt something shift inside me. Not just grief or anger, but the beginning of what Uncle Garrett had promised in his letter, liberation. The confrontation with my family wasn't ending. It was just beginning. But for the first time in my life, I'd be entering it with full knowledge of the truth, resources to protect myself, and people who actually valued me standing beside me. Before we dive into what happened next, let me know in the comments if you've ever discovered that family dynamics you thought were normal were actually deeply dysfunctional. You're not alone. And make sure you're subscribed because this story takes several more surprising turns. Monday morning arrived with unusual clarity. I'd barely slept again, but instead of exhaustion, I felt focused, energized by purpose. Rowena had stayed over, and we'd spent hours organizing Uncle Garrett's documentation into categories: trust fund embezzlement, financial timeline, correspondence proving Constance's knowledge, and a separate folder containing Uncle Garrett's personal observations about family patterns spanning 2 decades. The sheer volume of evidence he'd collected was staggering. Bank statements showing transfers from my father's trust account to Constance's personal investments. Emails where she'd instructed the original trustee to misrepresent the fund's value. Even recorded phone conversations, apparently legal in Colorado with single-party consent, where she discussed her strategy for keeping me manageable through financial dependence. "Your uncle was methodical," Rowena observed as we prepared breakfast. "This isn't just documentation, it's a comprehensive case file. He must have been gathering this for years." "He mentioned once that he believed in keeping accurate records," I said, remembering a conversation from my architecture school days. "He said the truth always matters, even when it's uncomfortable." I thought he was just being philosophical. My phone had been exploding since 6 a.m. with increasingly hostile messages from family members and their social circle. Apparently, Penelope's Instagram campaign had escalated overnight. She'd posted a carefully worded story about family betrayal and discovering who really cares about your happiness, accompanied by a photo of her looking wistfully at wedding venues she claimed she could no longer afford. The comments section had become a Greek chorus of outrage directed at me. People I'd known for years, family friends who'd attended my project unveilings, were suddenly condemning my selfishness without knowing any actual facts about the situation. "They're building a narrative," Rowena said, scrolling through the social media posts. "Classic manipulation tactic, control the story before anyone can question it. They're painting you as the villain before you can present your side." "I don't want to present my side publicly," I said, feeling uncomfortable with the thought of airing family finances on social media. "That feels beneath you?" Rowena finished. "That's the problem, Nat. You've been trained to take the high road while they take every road that gets them what they want. Sometimes the high road just means you're an easier target." She had a point, but something in me resisted stooping to their level. Uncle Garrett's letter had emphasized liberation, not revenge. There had to be a way to protect myself without becoming the person they'd always accused me of being. At 9 a.m., I had an appointment with Lawrence Pemberton, Uncle Garrett's estate attorney. His office occupied the 15th floor of a sleek downtown building with views of the Capitol. The reception area featured mid-century modern furniture and original abstract paintings that suggested both success and refined taste. Pemberton himself emerged from his office exactly on time, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that assessed me with clear intelligence. "Ms. Hartley," he said, extending his hand. "I've been expecting your call, though perhaps not quite this soon. Please, come in." His office was lined with law books and framed photographs of what appeared to be his extended family, children, grandchildren, all beaming at the camera with genuine affection. The contrast to my own family dynamics wasn't lost on me. "I assume you've read Garrett's letter," Pemberton began, settling behind his mahogany desk. "And discovered the supplementary documentation he asked me to include." "About my mother embezzling from my trust fund," I said directly, watching his reaction. He nodded without surprise. "Garrett consulted with me extensively about how to handle that situation. He struggled with the decision to document rather than immediately confront. Ultimately, he felt the choice of what to do with the information should be yours." "Why didn't he tell me while he was alive?" Pemberton leaned back in his chair, considering his words carefully. "He worried about damaging your relationship with your mother while you still sought her approval. Garrett believed, and I think correctly, that you needed to arrive at your own understanding of the family dynamics before the financial evidence would make sense. Otherwise, Constance could have convinced you the documentation was fabricated or misunderstood." The observation stung because it was accurate. 5 years ago, if Uncle Garrett had presented me with evidence of my mother's theft, I probably would have made excuses for her. I'd been too conditioned to doubt my own perceptions, too invested in believing that if I just tried harder, Constance would eventually value me. "What are my legal options regarding the embezzlement?" I asked. Pemberton pulled out a thick file folder. "Multiple options, each with different implications. First, you could file a civil lawsuit for recovery of the stolen funds plus interest. Given the documentation Garrett compiled, you'd almost certainly win. The statute of limitations is complex here because the theft was ongoing and you only recently discovered it, but we have strong grounds. What would that look like practically? Court proceedings, public records, likely media attention given the amounts involved. Your mother would be required to repay approximately $2.3 million plus accumulated interest, probably closer to $3.2 million total. If she can't pay, liens would be placed on her assets, including the family estate. I imagine the fallout. The public humiliation for Constance. Derek caught in the middle. The extended family choosing sides. It would be war, complete and devastating. Second option? I asked. You could report it to law enforcement as criminal fraud. Given the documentation, prosecutors would likely pursue charges. Your mother could face jail time. The thought made me physically ill, despite everything. That seems extreme. It is extreme, Pemberton agreed. Which is why I'm presenting all options. Third possibility, you could use the documentation as leverage for negotiated settlement. Essentially, repay what you stole quietly, or face legal action. This keeps everything private but requires ongoing negotiation with someone who's proven herself untrustworthy. Fourth option, do nothing. Keep the documentation as insurance but don't actively pursue recovery. This maintains peace but essentially lets the theft stand. Each option carried consequences that extended beyond Constance to affect Derek, to shape family dynamics for years, to define who I would become in response to this betrayal. There's something else you should know, Pemberton continued. Garrett included a clause in his will that I haven't mentioned yet. He established a secondary trust of $500,000 specifically for Derek, to be distributed after you received your inheritance and had time to review all documentation. Why the delay? Garrett wanted you to have first knowledge of the family financial situation. He worried that if Derek received money simultaneously, Constance would find a way to access it or manipulate him into sharing it with Penelope. This way, you can help Derek understand the full picture before he receives his distribution. My younger brother. The family's Switzerland. I'd always thought his neutrality stemmed from weakness, but maybe it was survival strategy in a family that punished dissent. Derek doesn't know about any of this? I asked. Only that he's named in Garrett's will for a distribution pending certain conditions. He doesn't know about the embezzlement or that his own trust fund was also stolen from. Constance took from Derek's trust too. Pemberton nodded grimly. Approximately $800,000. She was equal opportunity in her theft, if not in her affection. The scope of Constance's deception kept expanding. She hadn't just stolen from me, she'd robbed both her children while teaching us to be grateful for her sacrifices. My phone buzzed with another message. This one was from Derek. Mom says you're refusing to help Penelope because you've always been jealous of her. That's not true, right? Can we talk? At least Derek was asking rather than assuming. That had to count for something. I need to think about all of this, I told Pemberton. The legal options, the implications. This isn't just about money, it's about defining what kind of person I want to be. Of course, he said. But Natalie, I'll share something Garrett told me in one of our last conversations. He said, the question isn't whether Natalie will be kind, she'll always default to kindness because that's who she is. The question is whether she'll finally understand that kindness doesn't require accepting abuse. The words resonated in my chest, uncomfortably accurate. I'd confused tolerance of mistreatment with virtue, had believed that setting boundaries meant I was being difficult or selfish. There's one more thing, Pemberton said, pulling out a final envelope. Garrett asked me to give you this only after we discussed the legal situation. He said you'd know what to do with it when the time was right. Inside was a single document, a notarized affidavit from Constance's former financial advisor, dated 8 years ago, detailing her explicit instructions to misrepresent trust fund values to her children and confirmation that she'd acknowledged this constituted fraud but believed we'd never think to question it. In other words, Constance hadn't just stolen, she'd been confident we were too conditioned, too controlled, to ever challenge her narrative. The sheer arrogance of that assumption was breathtaking. I left Pemberton's office with 3 folders of documentation, a list of legal options, and a completely transformed understanding of my family history. What I'd interpreted as my mother's disappointment in me had actually been her strategic undermining. What I'd seen as Penelope's natural golden child status had been deliberately cultivated to maintain family hierarchy. What I'd experienced as my own inadequacy had been manufactured through systematic financial and emotional manipulation. Rowena was waiting in the building's lobby cafe, her laptop open with what appeared to be structural calculations for our Boulder Museum project. Normal work, normal life, a reminder that I'd built something real and valuable completely separate from my family's dysfunction. "How bad?" she asked as I slid into the seat across from her. "Worse than I thought, but also clearer," I said. "Derek's trust fund was embezzled from too. Uncle Garrett left him money but wanted me to know the full situation first. And there's documentation proving Constance knew exactly what she was doing and was confident we'd never question her." Rowena's expression darkened. "So this isn't just financial abuse, it's premeditated, systematic, and arrogant." "Apparently." "What are you going to do?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. Derek's name appeared on the screen. I looked at Rowena, who nodded encouragingly. "Hey, Derek," I answered. "Nat, what the hell is going on?" His voice was strained, confused. "Mom's on a rampage about you refusing to fund Penelope's wedding. She's saying you're trying to tear the family apart. But that doesn't sound like you, and I'm getting pieces of a story that doesn't make sense." I took a deep breath. My little brother deserved the truth, even if it would shatter his understanding of our family as thoroughly as mine had been shattered. "Derek, can you meet me somewhere private? Not the family estate. There's a lot you don't know, and I think it's time you heard the whole story." A pause. "Then, the brewing market on Larimer? I can be there in 20 minutes. See you there." As I ended the call, Rowena squeezed my hand. "You're doing the right thing. Derek deserves to understand what's really been happening." "Am I about to blow up what's left of our family?" I asked. "No," she said firmly. "Constance already did that years ago. You're just finally turning on the lights so everyone can see the damage." We gathered the documentation folders and headed toward the cafe where I would begin the process of sharing truth with the one family member who might actually be capable of hearing it. The confrontation with Penelope and Constance had been explosive but ultimately predictable. This conversation with Derek felt more significant, the potential for genuine alliance, for shared understanding, for building something authentic from the ruins of manufactured family dynamics. As we walked through downtown Denver's crisp autumn afternoon, I realized that Uncle Garrett's inheritance had given me more than money. He'd given me the tools to finally see clearly, the resources to stand independently, and through his careful documentation, permission to stop accepting unacceptable treatment in the name of family loyalty. What I chose to do with those tools would define not just the next legal battle, but the kind of person I would become in its aftermath. And for the first time in my life, I felt capable of making that choice from a position of strength rather than conditioned compliance. The brewing market occupied a converted warehouse space with exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, and the rich aroma of fresh roasted coffee beans. Derek was already there when Rowena and I arrived, sitting at a corner table far from other patrons, his fingers drumming anxiously against his coffee cup. At 28, my brother still had the boyish features that made him look younger, though today his expression carried an unfamiliar weight. "Thanks for coming," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. Rowena positioned herself at the adjacent table, close enough to provide support but far enough to give us privacy. Derek looked between us, then at the folders I'd placed on the table. "Mom said you've changed since getting Uncle Garrett's money. That you've become cold and calculating. But you brought your business partner to a family conversation, so maybe she's right? Rowena's here because she's my friend, and because what I'm about to tell you is difficult enough that I need support," I said evenly. "You can ask her to leave if it makes you uncomfortable, but I'd prefer she stay." He shook his head. "No, it's fine. Nat, what's happening?" 3 days ago we were a normal family. Now Penelope's posting cryptic Instagram stories, mom's rage texting everyone, and you're lawyering up? Over a wedding? This isn't about the wedding, I said carefully. The wedding demand was just the catalyst that exposed things that have been wrong for a very long time. I opened the first folder, pulling out Uncle Garrett's letter. Before we go further, I need you to read this. It's from Uncle Garrett. He left it with his will, but I only opened it 2 days ago. Derek took the pages hesitantly, his eyes scanning the handwritten text. I watched his expression shift from confusion to disbelief to something harder to identify. When he reached the part about the embezzled trust funds, his hands started shaking. This can't be real, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom wouldn't. Dad left us money? I've always been told he died basically broke, that Mom had to sacrifice everything to raise us. That was the story Constance created, I confirmed. The documentation proves otherwise. Dad left substantial trust funds for both of us. About $2.3 million in mine, $800,000 in yours. She was the trustee. She transferred the money to her personal accounts over 15 years and told us the funds never existed. Derek set down the letter, his face pale. Show me the proof. I spent the next 30 minutes walking him through bank statements, trust documents, and the damning affidavit from Constance's former financial advisor. Derek absorbed it all with growing horror, occasionally stopping me to ask clarifying questions that revealed his analytical mind working through the implications. The summer I wanted to study abroad in London, he said suddenly. Junior year of college. I asked Mom if there was any way we could afford it, and she said absolutely not, that I needed to be grateful I was getting any education at all after Dad left us with nothing. She made me feel guilty for even asking. While she was funding Penelope's third trip to Europe that year, I added quietly. And I thought it was because Penelope was just naturally more deserving somehow. Derek laughed bitterly. God, I've been such an idiot. You weren't an idiot. You were manipulated by someone who's had decades of practice controlling narratives. I pulled out another document. There's more. Uncle Garrett left you $500,000 in his will, but he structured it to be distributed after I received mine and had time to review all this documentation. Derek looked up sharply. Why the delay? He wanted me to be able to explain the full situation to you first. He worried that if you got money at the same time as my inheritance, Constance would find ways to access it or pressure you into sharing with Penelope. He was probably right, Derek admitted. 2 months ago, I would have given Mom anything she asked for without question. I've always thought. I mean, she raised us alone after Dad died. I thought we owed her everything. She raised us with money she stole from us, I corrected gently. And she used that theft to create a power dynamic where we'd always feel indebted to her sacrifices that never actually existed. Derek pushed back from the table, running his hands through his hair. I need to think. This is. Jesus, Nat, this changes everything. Every memory, every family interaction. It's all been built on lies. I know. I've been processing the same thing for 2 days. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the coffee cup he'd forgotten to drink. Then, what are you going to do? Legally, I mean. Uncle Garrett's attorney must have outlined options. I explained the choices Pemberton had presented: civil lawsuit, criminal charges, negotiated settlement, or doing nothing. Derek listened intently, his expression growing more troubled with each option. The thing is, I said, this isn't just about recovering stolen money. It's about deciding what kind of family we want to be going forward. Or if we want to be a family at all. You're thinking about cutting them off completely, Derek observed. I'm thinking about setting boundaries that actually protect me instead of just maintaining false peace, I clarified. I spent 34 years trying to earn love from people who fundamentally don't respect me. I'm done with that. But I don't know yet what that means practically. Derek's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it and grimaced. Mom. Asking where I am and reminding me that family loyalty is everything. The irony is almost funny. What are you going to tell her? I don't know yet, he admitted. Part of me wants to confront her immediately with all of this. Demand answers, explanations. But another part. He trailed off, looking genuinely lost. Another part still wants her to have some reasonable explanation that makes this okay? I suggested. Yeah. Is that pathetic? It's human. She's our mother. We're wired to want her love and approval, even when she's proven she doesn't deserve that power over us. Rowena spoke up from her adjacent table, where she'd been discreetly monitoring our conversation. Can I offer an outside perspective? Derek nodded. You're both in shock right now, which is completely understandable. But shock isn't the best state for making permanent decisions. You don't have to choose between immediate confrontation and complete capitulation. You can take time to process, to plan, to decide what you actually want rather than just reacting to what Constance wants from you. She's not going to give us that time, Derek said. She's already in full pressure mode about Penelope's wedding money. If Nat doesn't cave soon, the family campaign is going to intensify. Let it intensify, I said, surprised by my own certainty. I'm not giving Penelope my inheritance regardless of how much social pressure they apply. I've made that decision. The question is what happens next. Derek looked at me with something like admiration. When did you get so strong? The question caught me off guard. I don't know if it's strength or just finally hitting my breaking point. There's only so many times you can be told you're selfish and difficult before you start wondering if maybe the problem isn't you. Uncle Garrett saw it, Derek said, gesturing to the letter. He knew you were being systematically undermined. He documented it for years, waiting for the right moment to give you the evidence. That's not coincidence, he recognized something worth protecting. The observation made my throat tight with emotion. Uncle Garrett had seen me, truly seen me, when my own mother had only seen a resource to be managed. I think I need to meet with Pemberton too, Derek said suddenly. If I'm getting inheritance money, I need to understand the legal situation fully. And I want to know what my options are regarding the stolen trust fund. You'd consider pursuing that? I asked, surprised. I don't know yet. But I want to understand what's possible. Constance has controlled every aspect of our lives through financial manipulation. Maybe it's time she faces actual consequences. Before I could respond, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Natalie Hartley, came an unfamiliar female voice. Speaking. This is Amanda Whitmore from the Denver Chronicle. I'm following up on some interesting social media posts about a family inheritance dispute. I was hoping you might comment on allegations that you're refusing to help your sister fund her wedding despite receiving millions from a recently deceased uncle. My stomach dropped. No comment, I said immediately, ending the call. What was that? Derek asked. A reporter. Apparently Penelope's social media campaign has attracted media attention. Rowena's expression turned grim. They're escalating. Trying to force your hand through public pressure. This is going to get ugly fast. Derek's phone rang next, the same unknown number. He declined the call, but we all understood what was happening. Constance and Penelope weren't just applying family pressure anymore. They were weaponizing public opinion, counting on my instinct to avoid confrontation to make me capitulate. I need to make a statement, I said, thinking aloud. Something brief that establishes my position without engaging with their narrative. Or, Rowena suggested, you could have Pemberton issue a statement from the estate. Keep it legal and formal. Something like, Ms. Hartley is in full compliance with her uncle's clearly stated wishes as outlined in his legal will. Family members disputing the inheritance may address their concerns through appropriate legal channels. Derek nodded slowly. That puts it back in their court. If they want to challenge, they have to do it officially, where the embezzlement evidence becomes relevant. Exactly, Rowena said. Right now they're operating in the court of public opinion where facts don't matter. Move it to actual court where documentation matters, and suddenly they're the ones with exposure. The strategy made sense, but it also meant acknowledging that we were in an actual battle now. Not just a family disagreement that would blow over, but a fundamental fracture that would require legal and social navigation. I have a client meeting in an hour, I said, checking my watch. The Boulder Museum project team. Normal work, normal life. I can't let this consume everything. That's probably healthy, Derek agreed. Though I'm not sure how you're focusing on architecture right now. Architecture is the one thing in my life that's always made sense, I said simply. It's governed by physics and math and design principles that don't change based on someone's mood or agenda. Right now, I need that stability. We made plans to meet again the following day, after Derek had time to process and I'd spoken with Pemberton about issuing a formal statement. As we stood to leave, Derek pulled me into an unexpected hug. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For all the times I stayed neutral when I should have defended you. For believing Mom's version of things without questioning. For not seeing what was really happening. You were surviving the same system I was, I said, returning the embrace. We both did what we had to do. Now we get to decide who we want to be going forward. As Rowena and I drove back to my penthouse, I felt the weight of the morning's revelations settling into my bones. The inheritance that had seemed like a gift 2 days ago now felt like a test, not of my worthiness, but of my willingness to finally value myself as much as Uncle Garrett had valued me. My phone continued buzzing with texts and calls from family members, friends of Constance, and now apparently media outlets looking for a story. The pressure campaign Penelope had initiated was metastasizing into something larger and more public than I'd anticipated. But underneath the anxiety about public scrutiny, I felt something unexpected, a kind of calm clarity. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to manage other people's perceptions of me. I wasn't attempting to be acceptable enough, generous enough, compliant enough to earn love that should never have been conditional. I was simply standing firm in a boundary I'd established, backed by legal documentation and the clear wishes of someone who had actually cared about my well-being. If that made me the villain in Constance and Penelope's narrative, so be it. I was finally learning that other people's stories about me didn't have to become my story about myself. As we pulled into my building's parking garage, Rowena turned to me with an assessing look. You know this is just the beginning, right? They're not going to back down easily. I know, I said. But neither am I. The Boulder Museum project meeting should have been a welcome distraction from family chaos. Instead, I found myself sitting in our firm's glass-walled conference room, watching my team present structural updates while my phone vibrated relentlessly in my bag with what I knew were increasingly hostile messages. Natalie, thoughts on the atrium lighting configuration? I snapped back to attention. My lead designer, Thomas Kershaw, was looking at me expectantly, along with the rest of the team. The architectural renderings displayed on the screen showed our proposed skylight system, a complex arrangement of angled glass panels designed to maximize natural light while minimizing heat gain. Sorry, could you repeat the question? I asked, feeling heat creep up my neck. Thomas exchanged glances with our structural engineer, Priya Valdez. Are you okay? You seem distracted today. Family situation, I said vaguely. Nothing that affects the project. Please continue. But Priya was already pulling out her phone, scrolling. Her expression shifted from professional interest to concern. Nat, there's an article on the Chronicle's website. About you and your family. With quotes from someone named Penelope Sutherland claiming you've cut off your sister financially despite being a multimillionaire. The rest of the team immediately pulled out their devices. I felt my carefully maintained professional composure cracking. It's complicated, I managed. And not something I can discuss during a client meeting. The client isn't here yet, Thomas pointed out gently. We're 30 minutes early. And you look like you're about to shatter. What's going on? I'd always maintained strict boundaries between personal and professional life. My team knew almost nothing about my family dynamics, partly by design. But sitting there, watching them read sensationalized accounts of my supposed greed and cruelty, I realized that silence was allowing Constance and Penelope to control the narrative even in spaces they'd never physically entered. My uncle died 3 months ago and left me a substantial inheritance, I said carefully. My sister is getting married and has decided she's entitled to that money to fund her wedding. When I refused, she launched a social media campaign painting me as selfish. Apparently it's escalated to mainstream media now. That's insane, Priya said bluntly. It's your inheritance. She has no legal claim to it. Legal claim isn't the point for them, I replied. Public pressure is the point. They're counting on me being embarrassed enough by negative attention to just give in. Thomas was still scrolling through his phone. There are follow-up articles. Society family torn apart over wedding funds. Denver architect refuses to help sister's dream day. Jesus, they're really going after you. My phone rang, Pemberton's office. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. Ms. Hartley, we have a situation, Pemberton's assistant said without preamble. Several media outlets have contacted our office requesting comment. Additionally, your mother's attorney just sent a formal letter demanding you reconsider your unreasonable position regarding family financial support. I'm emailing you the letter now. What does it say? Essentially, it claims that your uncle was mentally incompetent when he made his will, that you exercised undue influence over him, and that the family intends to challenge the will's validity in probate court if you don't voluntarily share the inheritance equitably. The threat was both predictable and breathtaking in its audacity. Constance was willing to publicly claim her own brother was incompetent to maintain control over money that was never hers. Can they successfully challenge the will? I asked. Highly unlikely. Garrett was thoroughly evaluated by multiple physicians in the months before his death specifically to prevent such challenges. He anticipated this possibility. But they can make the process lengthy and expensive. More importantly, they can keep it in the news cycle, which seems to be their primary strategy. So it's legal harassment. Precisely. They're using the court system as another pressure tactic. Mr. Pemberton wants to schedule an emergency meeting this afternoon to discuss response strategies. I agreed to come in at 4 o'clock and return to the conference room. The client had arrived during my absence, Jennifer Takahashi, the museum's director, along with 2 board members. They were chatting comfortably with my team, but I could see from Jennifer's expression that she'd also seen the articles. The meeting proceeded professionally. We discussed construction timelines, budget adjustments, and design refinements. But there was an undercurrent of awareness, an elephant in the room that everyone was carefully avoiding until the clients departed. The moment the conference room door closed behind them, my entire team turned to me with varying expressions of concern and curiosity. All right, full story, Rowena said, emerging from her office where she'd been working during the client meeting. The team deserves to know what's actually happening, especially since it's becoming public knowledge anyway. I spent 20 minutes outlining the situation, including Uncle Garrett's letter, the embezzlement documentation, and now the threat to challenge the will. My team listened with growing outrage. Your mother stole your trust fund and now she's demanding more money? Thomas said incredulously. That's not just entitled, that's sociopathic. The pattern is classic financial abuse, Priya added. She'd mentioned once that her own mother had escaped an abusive marriage. Create dependence, undermine confidence, then demand gratitude for manufactured sacrifices. My mom's ex-husband used the same playbook. What are you going to do? Asked Marcus Chen. No, I couldn't use that name. What are you going to do? Asked Felix Rivera, our junior architect. Short term, meet with my attorney this afternoon about responding to the will challenge. Longer term, I honestly don't know. But I'm not giving them the inheritance, regardless of what pressure they apply. Good, Rowena said firmly. And we're supporting you through this. Whatever you need, flexible schedule for legal meetings, moral support, someone to screen your calls, we've got your back. The solidarity was unexpected and profoundly moving. I'd spent so long believing I had to handle everything alone that I'd forgotten what actual support looked like. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Derek. Mom just showed up at my apartment demanding to know what you told me. She's furious. I didn't let her in, but she's not leaving. Can you call Pemberton about a restraining order if this escalates? I need to go, I said, showing Rowena the message. My mother is harassing Derek now. I'm coming with you, she said immediately. Derek's apartment was in a modern complex near Washington Park, about 20 minutes from downtown. We found him standing in his building's lobby, clearly uncomfortable, while Constance paced near the entrance like a caged predator. She looked different than she had 3 days ago, still impeccably dressed, but with an edge of barely contained rage that made her seem almost unhinged. "Natalie," she said sharply when she saw me enter. "Perfect. You can explain to your brother why you're filling his head with poisonous lies about his own mother." I showed him documentation, I replied evenly, very aware that we were in a semi-public space with other residents passing through. "Uncle Garrett's letter and the financial records proving you embezzled from our trust funds." "Embezzled," Constance spat the word. "I was the trustee. I made financial decisions in your best interests. Just because you don't understand sophisticated financial management doesn't mean." "You transferred $2.3 million from my trust account to your personal investments," I interrupted. "You told me my father died broke when he actually left substantial funds specifically for Derek and me. You systematically lied to us for 15 years while spending money that legally belonged to us. That's not financial management, that's theft." Other residents had slowed their passage through the lobby, clearly listening to the confrontation. Constance noticed and adjusted her tactics, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "We need to discuss this privately, as a family. Not in public, not through lawyers. Come to the house tonight. We'll sit down like adults and work this out. So you can pressure us in the environment you control?" Derek said quietly. "No thanks, Mom. If you want to explain the financial discrepancies, you can do it through your attorney to our attorney." Constance's expression shifted to something like genuine shock. Derek had never openly defied her before. Her surprise quickly curdled into fury directed at me. "This is your doing. You've poisoned him against me with your twisted interpretations. Derek, honey, your sister has always been unstable, dramatic. You know this. Don't let her manipulate you into destroying our family." "I've read the documents," Derek said, his voice stronger now. "Bank statements, trust agreements, the affidavit from your financial advisor confirming you knew it was fraud. Those aren't twisted interpretations. They're facts." "Facts," Constance laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about facts?" "Fact, I raised you both alone after your father died. Fact, I sacrificed my own life and opportunities to give you everything. Fact, Garrett's money rightfully belongs to the entire family, not just one selfish daughter who's always resented the rest of us. If you sacrificed so much, where did the money come from?" I asked. "The European trips for Penelope, the luxury cars, the country club memberships. If Dad left us broke like you claimed, how did you afford any of it?" The question hung in the air. Constance's jaw tightened. "I had my own family money." "Which you've also told different stories about depending on the audience," I countered. "Sometimes you inherited wealth from your parents. Sometimes you built it through savvy investments. Sometimes you married my father for his money. The stories change, but the pattern doesn't. You rewrite history to suit whatever narrative maintains your control." "Don't you dare psychoanalyze me," Constance hissed. "I'm your mother. I deserve respect." "Respect is earned," Derek said quietly. "And stealing from your children, then lying about it for 15 years, doesn't earn it." Constance turned on him with vicious precision. "You ungrateful little, I could have given you up. After your father died and Natalie was already so difficult, I could have sent you to live with relatives. But I didn't. I kept you, raised you, loved you. And this is how you repay me?" The manipulation was textbook, reframing basic parental responsibility as extraordinary sacrifice deserving infinite gratitude. But I could see Derek recognizing it now, the same way I'd learned to see through Constance's tactics over the past few days. "Keeping your own child isn't a favor," he said. "It's the baseline expectation of parenthood." Something in Constance seemed to snap. Her carefully maintained composure shattered, revealing the raw anger beneath. "Fine," she said coldly. If you both want to side with Natalie's delusions, go ahead. But understand the consequences. You're choosing to be cut off from this family. No more holiday gatherings. No more family events. You'll be dead to us. Good, I said, surprised by how little the threat affected me. If being part of this family requires accepting abuse and theft, I'll happily be dead to you. Derek nodded agreement. Same. Constance stared at us both, perhaps expecting one of us to break, to backtrack, to desperately negotiate for her affection as we'd been trained to do our entire lives. When neither of us did, her expression shifted to something almost reptilian, cold calculation replacing heat. You're going to regret this, she said quietly. Both of you. I have resources you can't imagine. Connections. Influence. By the time I'm done, everyone will know exactly what kind of ungrateful, lying children you are. Is that a threat? Rowena asked, speaking up for the first time. She'd been recording the entire interaction on her phone. Because we have legal recourse for harassment and defamation. Constance's eyes narrowed at Rowena. And who are you? Someone with no reason to stay silent about what I've witnessed, Rowena replied calmly. Unlike your children, I have no emotional investment in maintaining pretty fictions about your character. The building's security guard had approached during this exchange, clearly responding to the raised voices and tense energy. Is there a problem here? He asked, looking primarily at Derek. Miss Sutherland is leaving, Derek said firmly. She's not welcome in this building. Constance drew herself up with as much dignity as she could muster. This isn't over. Not even close. She swept out of the lobby, leaving behind the acrid smell of her expensive perfume and the echo of threats both explicit and implied. The three of us stood in silence for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then Derek started laughing, a slightly hysterical sound. Did we just mutually disown our mother in my apartment building lobby? He asked. I think we did, I confirmed. Good, he said. Because honestly, that felt amazing. We moved up to Derek's apartment, a modest one-bedroom that reflected his graphic designer's aesthetic with minimalist furniture and vibrant artwork. Once inside, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a more complex mixture of relief and grief. She's really going to make this nuclear, Derek observed, collapsing onto his sofa. The will challenge, the media campaign, turning the whole family against us. This is going to be brutal. Probably, I agreed. But at least it'll be honest. No more pretending everything's fine. No more accepting unacceptable treatment to maintain false peace. My phone rang with Pemberton's number. I answered on speaker so Derek and Rowena could hear. Miss Hartley, I've drafted a response to your mother's attorney regarding the will challenge. I'm also preparing to file a counterclaim for the trust fund embezzlement if they proceed with challenging Garrett's will. Essentially, if they want to make this a legal battle, we'll make it comprehensive. What does that mean practically? Derek asked. It means we'll request full financial discovery, every bank account, every transaction, every financial decision Constance has made as trustee for the past 20 years. If she wants to question Garrett's mental competency, we'll question her financial ethics. It'll be ugly, expensive, and very public. Which is why I'm recommending we send a clear warning first, withdraw the will challenge, or face embezzlement charges. Do it, I said, looking at Derek for confirmation. He nodded firmly. One more thing, Pemberton continued. I've been contacted by 2 other relatives, cousins on your father's side. They saw the media coverage and want you to know they support you. Apparently there's been long-standing concern about Constance's financial behavior that they've never felt able to address. The revelation that other family members had noticed Constance's patterns was both validating and frustrating. Why had no one spoken up before? But I understood the answer, the same reasons Derek and I had stayed silent. Fear of conflict, hope that things would improve, the powerful pull of family loyalty even when that family was fundamentally dysfunctional. After the call ended, the 3 of us sat in Derek's living room, the weight of the day's confrontations settling over us. What do we do now? Derek asked. We move forward, I said. We work with Pemberton on the legal strategy. We ignore the social media noise. We build lives that don't require their approval or participation. That's simple, he asked skeptically. That complicated, I corrected. But possible. Uncle Garrett gave us the tools. Now we have to be brave enough to use them. The summons arrived by courier on a gray Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after my confrontation with Constance in Derek's lobby. I was reviewing blueprints for a residential project when my assistant, Kevin, knocked on my office door with an expression that told me this wasn't routine mail. Legal document, he said, handing me the thick envelope. Requires your signature. Inside was a formal petition to the Denver Probate Court. Constance Sutherland, represented by the law firm of Morrison and Blake, was officially challenging Uncle Garrett's will on grounds of mental incompetence and undue influence. The document was 37 pages of legal language essentially arguing that I had manipulated a vulnerable elderly man into leaving me money that rightfully belonged to the entire family. What made it particularly galling was the supporting affidavit from Penelope, describing in fabricated detail how I had isolated Uncle Garrett from other family members and exploited his declining mental state for financial gain. The narrative was so divorced from reality that it would have been laughable if it weren't being submitted as sworn testimony to an actual court. My phone rang immediately. Pemberton, who'd apparently received his copy of the filing simultaneously. They're going forward with it, he said without preamble. Which means we're going forward with the embezzlement counterclaim. I'm filing this afternoon. Things are about to get very public and very ugly. I understand, I said, though my hands were shaking as I held the legal documents. Do what needs to be done. There's something else. The Chronicle is running a longer piece tomorrow. They contacted me for comment about the will challenge. I gave them a statement emphasizing Garrett's thorough mental competency evaluations and hinting at financial irregularities in Constance's trusteeship. Fair warning, this is about to become a major local story. After we ended the call, I sat in my office trying to process the escalation. A week ago, I'd been living a relatively quiet life focused on architecture and building my firm. Now I was the central figure in what was shaping up to be a sensational legal battle that would expose every dysfunction in my family to public scrutiny. Rowena appeared in my doorway. I just got a call from a reporter asking about your history of mental instability. Apparently that's the new angle Constance is pushing, that you've always been troubled and are now acting out by refusing reasonable family requests. Mental instability, I repeated flatly. Based on what evidence? According to the reporter, anonymous family sources citing your pattern of difficult behavior and inability to maintain normal family relationships. Classic Darvo, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. My office phone rang, the main firm line. Kevin picked up, spoke briefly, then transferred the call to Rowena's extension instead of mine. Through my glass office wall, I watched her expression darken as she listened. That was the Boulder Museum, she said after hanging up. Their board received an anonymous letter questioning your professional ethics and suggesting they might want to reconsider their association with someone involved in a family inheritance dispute. It included links to all the negative press. The room seemed to tilt slightly. They were attacking my professional reputation now, trying to damage the career I'd built completely independent of family involvement. What did the museum say? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jennifer Takahashi told them to disregard it. She knows you and trusts your work. But Nat, this is a coordinated campaign. They're trying to destroy every aspect of your life to force compliance. Thomas knocked and entered without waiting for permission. The AIA chapter just called. Someone filed an ethics complaint against you claiming you obtained your inheritance through fraudulent means. It's completely baseless, but it'll require a formal response and review process. The American Institute of Architects' ethics complaint was particularly vicious because it could affect my professional licensing. Even if ultimately dismissed, the investigation would be time-consuming and potentially damaging to my reputation within the architectural community. They're going scorched earth, I said, feeling the full weight of Constance's promised consequences settling over me. My personal phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Just got served with a subpoena. They're requiring me to testify about your pattern of manipulating family members for financial gain. My attorney says I need to prepare for deposition next week. Then another text from an unknown number. You could end this any time by doing the right thing. Just give Penelope what she deserves and all of this goes away. Think about what you're putting everyone through. I showed both messages to Rowena, who immediately began documenting them. That second text could constitute harassment or attempted extortion. Pemberton needs to see these. The morning dissolved into a series of emergency calls and meetings. Pemberton outlined the counterattack strategy. We'd file the embezzlement claim with full documentation, request expedited discovery to put Constance immediately on the defensive, and issue statements to the press emphasizing the documented theft rather than the inheritance dispute. The best defense is offense in cases like this, Pemberton explained during our video conference. They're trying to control the narrative by making you the villain. We need to shift that narrative to the documented facts, a mother who stole from her children and is now harassing them for refusing to give her more money. Won't that just make everything more public? I asked. It's already public. Your mother ensured that. Now we need to make sure the public knows the full story, not just her version. Otherwise you're letting her weaponize your desire for privacy against you. Derek joined the call from his apartment, looking exhausted. I just got off the phone with 5 different relatives. All of them calling to tell me I'm destroying the family and betraying Mom. They all just want to help us reconcile, which apparently means pressuring us to give Penelope the money. Anyone believe you about the embezzlement? I asked. 2 cousins, Aunt Patricia's kids, Lydia and James. They said they've always suspected Mom's financial stories didn't add up. Everyone else either doesn't believe it or doesn't want to believe it because it's too uncomfortable. The selective belief was predictable but still painful. People would rather maintain comfortable fictions than acknowledge difficult truths, especially when those truths required them to reassess relationships and family dynamics. My office door opened again. This time it was Jennifer Takahashi from the Boulder Museum, unannounced and looking concerned. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, but I thought you should know in person rather than through another phone call. The board held an emergency meeting this morning about the situation. My stomach dropped. Are you pulling the project? No, she said firmly. Absolutely not. But I wanted you to hear directly that we're standing by you. The board reviewed the anonymous letter, looked at the actual facts available, and concluded this is a family dispute being weaponized against you professionally. We're issuing a statement this afternoon expressing full confidence in your firm and the project. The unexpected support nearly broke through my carefully maintained composure. Thank you. You have no idea what that means right now. I have some idea, Jennifer said quietly. I went through my own ugly divorce 5 years ago. My ex tried similar tactics, contacting my employer, questioning my professional competency, spreading rumors to isolate me. The people who stood by me made all the difference. Consider us standing by you. After she left, I sat at my desk feeling the competing weights of attack and support. For every person trying to destroy me, another was stepping forward to defend me. The ratio wasn't quite even. Constance had decades of social connections and carefully cultivated sympathy, but it wasn't the total isolation I'd feared either. Rowena returned with printed copies of the Denver Chronicle's advance article, scheduled to run the next morning. The headline read, "Inheritance Battle Reveals Allegations of Trust Fund Theft." The piece was surprisingly balanced, presenting both the Will challenge and Pemberton's counterclaims about embezzlement. It included quotes from Uncle Garrett's physicians attesting to his mental clarity, and noted the existence of substantial documentation supporting the theft allegations. This changes the conversation, Rowena observed. They can't maintain the narrative that you're just a greedy daughter refusing to share if the public knows you're actually responding to documented theft. My phone rang with yet another unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Natalie Hartley, came an older woman's voice. This is Patricia Fitzgerald. I was your father's sister. I sat up straighter. Aunt Patricia, my father's older sister, whom I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Constance had systematically distanced us from Dad's side of the family after his death, claiming they blamed her for the accident and were trying to take custody of Derek and me. "Aunt Patricia," I said carefully. "This is unexpected." "I imagine it is. Constance worked very hard to keep me away from you children. But Lydia showed me the legal filings and the news articles. I think it's time you knew some things about your father's death and what happened after." The conversation that followed lasted 45 minutes and fundamentally rewrote another chapter of my family history. Aunt Patricia explained that my father's death hadn't been a simple car accident as I'd been told. He'd been driving to meet with a divorce attorney when another vehicle ran a red light. He'd been planning to leave Constance and seek primary custody of Derek and me because he'd discovered financial irregularities in our trust fund management. "Thomas found out she was stealing from you kids," Patricia said, her voice heavy with old grief. "He was trying to handle it quietly, to protect you from the ugliness. He'd gathered documentation, consulted with lawyers. Then the accident happened, and suddenly Constance was the grieving widow and we were the cruel relatives trying to victimize her." "Why didn't you fight for custody?" I asked. "We tried. But Constance had sympathy on her side, the tragic young widow raising 2 children alone. The courts favored keeping you with your mother. We were granted visitation rights, but Constance made every visit so difficult, so full of drama and accusations, that eventually it became easier to step back. I've regretted that decision every day since." She'd stayed in distant contact through Uncle Garrett, who'd shared updates about my education and career. When she saw the current situation unfolding, she'd realized history was repeating itself, another generation discovering Constance's theft, another fight for financial justice. "Your father would be proud of how you're standing up to her," Patricia said. "He tried to do the same thing and it cost him everything. But you have advantages he didn't: Uncle Garrett's documentation, legal support, and you're an adult who can't be controlled through custody manipulation." After the call, I sat in stunned silence. My father hadn't died tragically while running a random errand. He died while actively fighting against Constance's financial abuse. The accident that had devastated my childhood had potentially been just that, an accident, but its timing had been devastatingly convenient for Constance, eliminating the one person who might have exposed her theft decades earlier. "You okay?" Rowena asked, noticing my expression. I told her what Patricia had revealed. Her face went pale. "Nat, this is a pattern spanning decades. Your father discovered the theft and died before he could act on it. Uncle Garrett discovered it and waited until after his death to expose it because he knew Constance would destroy him if he confronted her while alive. You're the first person who survived discovery long enough to actually fight back." The observation was chilling. Not because I believed Constance had caused my father's death, I didn't, but because it revealed how far she'd go to protect her financial control. She'd allowed her own husband to be remembered as a failure who'd left his children nothing rather than allow the truth of her theft to be known. Derek called, and I put him on speaker so Rowena could hear. "I just talked to Aunt Patricia too. She called me right after speaking with you. Jesus, Nat, Dad was trying to protect us from Mom when he died. And we've spent our whole lives believing her version of everything." "Not anymore," I said firmly. "We know the truth now. All of it. And we're not letting her rewrite history anymore." "The deposition is scheduled for Monday," Derek said. "Pemberton's team prepped me on what to expect. They're going to try to get me to say you've always been manipulative or difficult or obsessed with money. But I'm prepared. I know what actually happened." We talked strategy for a few more minutes, then I had to let him go for another call coming through, this one from Lydia, Patricia's daughter, my cousin. "I wanted you to know that several of us from Dad's side of the family are planning to attend the preliminary hearing," she said. "We're going to show visible support. Constance has controlled the family narrative for too long. It's time people saw that not everyone believes her version of events." The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks away, a preliminary proceeding where both sides would present basic arguments before the case proceeded to full trial. Pemberton had warned me it would be a media circus. Constance would make sure of that. But knowing I wouldn't be walking into that courtroom alone made it feel less daunting. I'd have Derek, Rowena, Aunt Patricia and her family, Jennifer from the museum, and my firm team who'd already expressed plans to attend in support. The isolation Constance had worked so hard to create was cracking, revealing connections and allies I hadn't known existed. As evening fell over Denver, I stood at my penthouse windows watching the city lights emerge against the darkening mountains. The battle ahead would be brutal, Constance had made that clear. The professional attacks would continue, the social media campaign would intensify, and the legal proceedings would drag my family's dysfunction into painful public view. But for the first time since this all began, I felt something beyond determination or anger. I felt supported. Seen. Believed. Uncle Garrett had given me financial independence. Aunt Patricia had given me truth about my father. Derek had given me solidarity. Rowena and my team had given me unconditional support. Constance had spent decades teaching me that I was alone, that family loyalty meant accepting abuse, that speaking truth meant losing love. Every assumption was proving false. The family I'd been so desperately trying to belong to had been an illusion. But the connections forming now, built on honesty rather than obligation, on mutual respect rather than manipulation, those were real. My phone buzzed one last time with a message from Pemberton, counterclaim filed. Full embezzlement documentation submitted to the court. Press release going out in 1 hour. Prepare for significant media attention tomorrow. I took a deep breath and replied, ready. Whether I actually felt ready was debatable. But I was committed. The path forward was clear, even if it led through significant pain and public scrutiny. Uncle Garrett had given me the tools for liberation. Now I was finally using them, not just to protect his inheritance, but to reclaim a truth that had been stolen from me long before any money was taken. The preliminary hearing would tell us much about how this battle would unfold. But regardless of courtroom outcomes, something fundamental had already shifted. I was no longer the daughter desperately seeking approval from people who would never truly value me. I was a woman with resources, documentation, allies, and most importantly, a clear understanding of who I actually was beneath the family narratives that had distorted my self-perception for decades. Constance had promised I'd regret standing up to her. She was probably right about that. But what she hadn't considered was that I might regret accommodating her even more. The Denver probate court building felt different on the morning of the preliminary hearing than it had during my initial consultation with Pemberton. Then, it had been just another downtown structure. Now, with news vans parked outside and reporters clustering near the entrance, it felt like walking into an arena designed specifically for public spectacle. Pemberton met me at a side entrance at 7:30, an hour before proceedings were scheduled to begin. He'd arranged early access to avoid the media gauntlet, at least temporarily. "How are you holding up?" he asked as we rode the elevator to the 4th floor. "I didn't sleep," I admitted. Kept rehearsing what I might be asked to say, what Constance might claim, how badly this could go. Understandable. But remember, this is just a preliminary hearing. Judge Matthews is reviewing whether there's sufficient grounds to proceed with the will challenge. We're not litigating the entire case today. Judge Catherine Matthews had a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency and intolerance for dramatic courtroom theatrics. Pemberton had seemed pleased with the assignment, though he'd warned me that her direct style could be uncomfortable for both sides. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood paneling that had dulled with age and fluorescent lighting that cast everyone in slightly sickly tones. Derek was already there with his attorney, seated in the row behind where Pemberton and I would sit. He gave me an encouraging nod that didn't quite mask his anxiety. Rowena arrived next, followed by Aunt Patricia and her daughter Lydia. Then, surprisingly, Jennifer Takahashi from the Boulder Museum, and Thomas and Priya from my firm. Felix had stayed back to manage the office, but he'd sent a text that morning, kicking ass today. "We believe in you." The visible support created a buffer against what came next, Constance's entrance with her attorney, Gregory Morrison, a silver-haired litigator known for aggressive tactics in family court disputes. Constance wore a dove-gray suit that projected refined suffering, her hair styled perfectly, her expression arranged into dignified pain. She'd clearly dressed for the cameras waiting outside. Behind her came Penelope, also impeccably dressed, clutching Carson's hand like a wounded heroine requiring support. They took their seats across the aisle without acknowledging Derek or me, though I felt Constance's gaze like a physical weight. More family members filtered in, relatives I recognized vaguely from holidays and weddings, all apparently choosing Constance's side. The courtroom began to feel packed despite its actual occupancy, divided into visible camps like a wedding where the bride and groom's families refused to mingle. At precisely 9 o'clock, Judge Matthews emerged from her chambers. She was younger than I'd expected, perhaps mid-50s, with sharp features and an expression that suggested she'd heard every possible family dispute and had little patience for manufactured drama. "Before we begin," she said without preamble, "I want to establish ground rules. This is a probate court, not a television studio. I've reviewed both the initial petition challenging Garrett Fitzgerald's will and the counterclaim regarding trust fund management. Both sides have submitted substantial documentation. Today's hearing will determine whether sufficient grounds exist to proceed with full litigation on either or both matters." She looked directly at the packed courtroom. "I'm aware this case has attracted media attention. That's irrelevant to these proceedings. What matters is evidence, testimony, and applicable law. Emotional appeals and family drama will not influence my assessment. Am I clear?" Both attorneys confirmed understanding. Judge Matthews nodded and directed Morrison to present his opening argument. Gregory Morrison stood with practiced gravitas, his voice carrying the weight of manufactured concern. "Your Honor, this case centers on a vulnerable elderly man who was systematically isolated from his family and manipulated into leaving his entire estate to one individual who exploited his declining mental capacity for personal gain. He outlined the will challenge, Uncle Garrett's alleged diminished capacity, my supposed undue influence, the unfairness of excluding other family members. The argument was legally structured but emotionally manipulative, painting me as a calculating predator and Uncle Garrett as a confused victim. We have witnesses prepared to testify about Miss Hartley's pattern of controlling behavior with the deceased," Morrison continued. "About how she discouraged his relationships with other family members, including his own sister-in-law, Constance Sutherland. About how she positioned herself as his sole confidant during his final years, explicitly to secure financial benefits. The description was so inverted from reality that it was almost impressive. I'd never discouraged Uncle Garrett from seeing anyone. Constance had avoided him because he'd questioned her financial management. My relationship with my uncle had been genuine, spanning decades, built on shared interests in architecture and sustainable design." When Morrison finished, Pemberton stood with a different energy, less theatrical, more methodical. "Your Honor, the petitioner's claim of mental incompetence is contradicted by extensive medical documentation. Garrett Fitzgerald underwent comprehensive cognitive evaluations by 3 separate physicians in the 6 months before his death, specifically anticipating this challenge. All assessments confirmed full mental capacity. He submitted the medical reports, then pivoted. More significantly, we must examine why this will is being challenged. Ms. Hartley's inheritance became controversial when she refused to give the money to her sister to fund a wedding. This refusal prompted the legal action we're seeing today." Pemberton paused for effect. "But there's a deeper issue. Our counterclaim presents evidence that Constance Sutherland, as trustee of funds left by her late husband for their children, embezzled approximately $3.2 million over 15 years. This isn't speculation. We have bank records, trust documents, and a sworn affidavit from Mrs. Sutherland's former financial advisor confirming she knowingly misrepresented fund values to her children." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Several relatives who'd come supporting Constance exchanged glances. Judge Matthews raised her hand for silence. "Mr. Pemberton, I've reviewed your submitted documentation on the trust fund matter. It's substantial. However, we're here today regarding the will challenge. The embezzlement allegations, while serious, are a separate legal issue. With respect, Your Honor, they're directly relevant. The petitioners claim Ms. Hartley manipulated her uncle for money. We're demonstrating a pattern where Mrs. Sutherland, the primary petitioner, has a documented history of financial manipulation and theft from family members. This calls into question her motivations and credibility in challenging a will that was legally executed by a mentally competent individual." Judge Matthews leaned back, considering. "Point taken. Mr. Morrison, your response?" Morrison stood again, his composure slightly ruffled. Your Honor, the allegations about trust fund management are unproven accusations being used to deflect from the actual issue. The documentation appears quite detailed, Judge Matthews interrupted, flipping through papers on her bench. Bank transfers, dates, amounts. Mr. Morrison, was your client aware these records existed when she filed the will challenge? A telling pause. We're prepared to address those allegations in appropriate venues, Your Honor. Today we're focused on. Answer the question, Counselor. Did Mrs. Sutherland know there was documentation of her trust fund management when she initiated this will challenge? Morrison glanced at Constance, who maintained her expression of dignified suffering but had gone slightly pale. I'd need to consult with my client before. Let me rephrase, Judge Matthews said, her tone sharpening. Mrs. Sutherland approached the bench. Constance stood with visible reluctance, moving to stand before the judge. Her attorney accompanied her, whispering urgently. Mrs. Sutherland, you're under oath, Judge Matthews said. Were you aware, when you filed this will challenge, that documentation existed regarding your management of your children's trust funds? The courtroom went silent. Constance's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing calculation beneath the performance of maternal suffering. I managed those funds appropriately, she said carefully. Any documentation would reflect legitimate financial decisions. That's not what I asked. Were you aware the documentation existed? Another pause. Then, I knew some records existed, yes. And did you consider how those records might appear if this will challenge proceeded to full litigation and discovery? Constance's jaw tightened. I have nothing to hide regarding my financial management. Then you won't object to providing complete financial records for the past 20 years as part of discovery if this case proceeds? Morrison interjected quickly. Your Honor, that's an overly broad request. It's standard discovery in cases involving accusations of financial manipulation, Judge Matthews countered. Mrs. Sutherland is alleging her daughter manipulated an elderly man for financial gain. Examining whether Mrs. Sutherland herself has a pattern of financial manipulation seems directly relevant to assessing her credibility as a witness. The judge's reasoning was devastating in its logic. By accusing me of financial manipulation, Constance had opened her own financial history to scrutiny. The will challenge she'd intended as a pressure tactic was becoming a spotlight on her own documented theft. Let's hear from Ms. Hartley, Judge Matthews said. Approach please. I stood on shaking legs and moved to the witness stand. Pemberton had prepared me for this, but preparation didn't eliminate the surreal feeling of being under oath in a courtroom full of family members, half of whom believed I was a manipulative thief. Judge Matthews looked at me directly. Ms. Hartley, describe your relationship with Garrett Fitzgerald. I took a breath and began. Not with legal language or defensive justifications, but with truth. I told her about learning architecture basics from Uncle Garrett when I was 12, how he'd encouraged my interest when others dismissed it as impractical. About weekly phone calls throughout college discussing sustainable design principles. About him attending every project unveiling, every award ceremony, every milestone in my career. He was the only person in my family who consistently believed in my capabilities, I said, hearing my voice crack slightly. Who celebrated my achievements without qualification or comparison to others. Who saw me as I actually was rather than who he wanted me to be. Did you ever ask him for money? Judge Matthews asked. Never. I didn't know the amount of his estate until after his death. We talked about architecture, about patents, about design philosophy. Money wasn't part of our relationship. Were you aware of the trust funds your father left for you and your brother? Not until Uncle Garrett's letter informed me after his death. I was always told my father died with minimal assets. How did that make you feel, discovering you'd been lied to about your inheritance? The question was unexpected in its directness. Betrayed, I said honestly. And it reframed my entire childhood. I'd been made to feel like a burden, like my needs were excessive, while my sister received everything she wanted. Learning that my father had actually left money specifically for me, and that my mother had stolen it, it explained patterns I'd never understood. Judge Matthews nodded slowly. And when your sister demanded you give her your inheritance for her wedding, what was your response? I said no. The money was left to me specifically by someone who loved me. Using it as my sister and mother demanded would dishonor Uncle Garrett's intentions and enable the same pattern of financial manipulation I'd finally discovered. Has anyone offered to pay you back for the stolen trust fund money? No, Your Honor. My mother denies any wrongdoing. My sister believes I'm selfish for not sharing. The will challenge and media campaign appear designed to pressure me into compliance through public humiliation. Judge Matthews made notes, her expression unreadable. Then she called Derek to testify. My brother approached the stand with visible nervousness but growing determination. His testimony corroborated mine: the financial lies, the systematic favoritism toward Penelope, the manipulation tactics. When Morrison tried to suggest Derek was simply supporting his sister out of misplaced loyalty, Derek responded with unexpected force. I've spent my whole life trying to stay neutral in my family, he said. Trying not to see the obvious favoritism, the financial inconsistencies, the way my mother systematically undermined Natalie. But the documentation doesn't lie. The bank records don't lie. And I'm done pretending that my mother's theft is somehow Natalie's fault for discovering it. Morrison attempted several more questions designed to discredit Derek's testimony, but each answer reinforced the core truth. Constance had stolen from her children and was now attacking the daughter who refused to give her more money. When Derek finished, Judge Matthews called for a 30-minute recess. The courtroom erupted into controlled chaos, relatives arguing in hushed voices, reporters rushing out to file updates, attorneys huddling with their clients. Pemberton pulled Derek and me into a small conference room off the main hallway. That went better than expected, he said. Judge Matthews is clearly skeptical of the will challenge and troubled by the embezzlement evidence. I think she's considering dismissing the challenge entirely. What does that mean for us? Derek asked. Best case scenario, she rules there's insufficient grounds to challenge the will, confirms Natalie's inheritance is legally valid, and potentially refers the embezzlement matter to criminal authorities for investigation. My stomach clenched. Criminal authorities? Theft of that magnitude, from minors' trust funds, is a serious crime. If Matthews believes prosecution is warranted, she can make that referral regardless of whether you choose to pursue civil action. The door opened and Aunt Patricia entered, her expression serious. There's something you need to know. Constance just had a complete meltdown in the hallway. She's screaming at her attorney about how this was supposed to pressure you into settling, not expose her financial situation. Several relatives heard everything. The mask was slipping completely. Constance's carefully maintained performance as the wounded mother was collapsing under the weight of actual legal scrutiny. When court reconvened, Judge Matthews looked even more austere than before. She'd clearly spent the recess reviewing documentation more thoroughly. I've reviewed the medical evaluations of Garrett Fitzgerald, she began without preamble. 3 separate physicians, all reputable, all confirming full cognitive capacity within 6 months of his death. The will was properly executed with appropriate witnesses. Mr. Fitzgerald explicitly stated his reasons for leaving his estate primarily to Ms. Hartley, and those reasons appear rational and well-considered. She paused, looking directly at Constance. More concerning is the counterclaim evidence. Bank records showing systematic transfers from trust accounts to personal accounts. Documentation of misrepresentation. A sworn affidavit from a financial advisor confirming knowledge of fraud. Morrison started to object, but Judge Matthews continued. This court finds insufficient grounds to proceed with challenging Garrett Fitzgerald's will. The petition is dismissed. The will stands as executed. Relief flooded through me so intensely I felt dizzy. Derek grabbed my hand, squeezing hard. But Judge Matthews wasn't finished. However, the embezzlement allegations are sufficiently serious that I'm referring this matter to the Denver District Attorney's Office for investigation. Mrs. Sutherland, you should consult with Criminal Defense Counsel, as you may face charges related to theft from minor children's trust funds. The courtroom erupted. Constance stood abruptly, her face contorted with rage. This is a travesty. She's manipulated everyone. Mrs. Sutherland, sit down, Judge Matthews commanded. You initiated this litigation. The consequences are of your own making. Constance didn't sit. Instead, she turned to face me directly, all pretense of dignity abandoned. You vindictive bitch. You've destroyed this family. I gave you everything and this is how you repay me? You stole from me, I said quietly. And from Derek. And you've spent decades making us feel like we should be grateful for your theft. That's what destroyed this family. Security guards moved toward Constance as her attorney tried to restrain her. But she pushed past him, advancing toward me with such fury that Pemberton stepped between us. You'll regret this, she hissed. I'll make sure everyone knows what you really are. Bailiff, remove Mrs. Sutherland from the courtroom, Judge Matthews ordered. Mrs. Sutherland, you're in contempt. I'm fining you $5,000 and barring you from any further contact with Ms. Hartley or Mr. Sutherland pending resolution of the criminal investigation. As security escorted Constance out, still screaming threats, the courtroom descended into chaos. Penelope rushed after her mother, Carson trailing behind looking shell-shocked. Several relatives followed, while others remained seated, apparently reconsidering which side they'd chosen. Judge Matthews banged her gavel repeatedly. Order. This proceeding is concluded. All parties are dismissed. As people filed out, Aunt Patricia approached Derek and me. Your father would be so proud, she said, tears in her eyes. He tried to fight her and didn't live to see justice. You both did. We left through the side exit Pemberton had arranged, avoiding the media circus at the main entrance. But even from inside the building, we could hear the commotion, reporters shouting questions, Constance's voice still audible making accusations, the general chaos of a family implosion made public. In Pemberton's car, driving away from the courthouse, none of us spoke for several minutes. Then Derek started laughing, a slightly hysterical sound that became genuine mirth. We did it, he said. We actually stood up to her and won. The criminal investigation is still pending, Pemberton cautioned. But yes, you protected your inheritance and established the truth of what happened. That's no small victory. It didn't feel victorious exactly. It felt like survival. Like finally stopping a pattern that had damaged multiple generations. Like choosing truth over comfortable fiction, even when truth cost relationships and social standing. But beneath the exhaustion and residual adrenaline, I felt something else, a fundamental shift in how I understood myself. I wasn't the difficult daughter, the selfish sister, the family disappointment. I was someone who'd been systematically manipulated and had finally found the courage to say no. Uncle Garrett's inheritance had given me financial independence. But the real gift had been his documentation, proof that I wasn't crazy, that the patterns I'd sensed were real, that my perceptions of mistreatment were grounded in truth rather than paranoia or hypersensitivity. As we drove through downtown Denver toward my penthouse, I realized the battle wasn't entirely over. Criminal charges would proceed. Family relationships would need reconstruction or permanent dissolution. Professional damage from Constance's campaign would require repair. But the foundation had shifted irrevocably. I was no longer fighting from a position of doubt about my own reality. I was standing on documented truth, surrounded by people who believed and supported me, finally free from the obligation to earn love that should never have been conditional in the first place. 6 months after the preliminary hearing, I stood in the Boulder Museum's newly completed atrium, watching afternoon sunlight filter through the geometric skylight system my team had designed. The space had transformed from architectural drawings into physical reality, soaring ceilings, clean lines, and carefully calibrated natural light that would showcase the museum's collection without damaging delicate pieces. Jennifer Takahashi walked through with the museum board, pointing out design features while I hung back, observing their reactions. This was the final walkthrough before the public opening next week, and despite months of construction challenges and budget negotiations, we delivered exactly what we'd promised. Natalie, come explain the ventilation system, Jennifer called, waving me over. I joined the group and spent 20 minutes discussing the sustainable climate control features, the energy-efficient materials, the accessible design elements we'd integrated throughout. The board members asked intelligent questions and seemed genuinely impressed. When the tour concluded, the board chair shook my hand firmly. "Exceptional work, Ms. Hartley. We're already discussing potential expansion phases and would like Hartley and Associates to be our primary consideration for future projects." After they left, Jennifer lingered. "You seem different than 6 months ago," she observed. "More settled somehow." "A lot has changed," I acknowledged. The criminal investigation into Constance had proceeded slowly but thoroughly. The district attorney had ultimately charged her with felony theft and fraud, serious charges that carried potential prison time. Her attorney had been negotiating a plea deal that would involve restitution, probation, and community service rather than incarceration. Constance would be required to repay the full amount stolen from both trust funds, plus interest and penalties, approximately $4.2 million total. She'd been forced to sell the Cherry Hills Village estate to cover part of the debt. The house I'd grown up in, the symbol of Sutherland family status, had been liquidated to pay for Constance's crimes. There was poetic justice in that, though I took no particular pleasure in it. Penelope's wedding had been postponed indefinitely. Carson had quietly ended their engagement 2 months after the court hearing, apparently unwilling to attach himself to a family embroiled in criminal proceedings. Penelope had moved in with a friend and, according to Derek, was working her first actual job, managing social media for a boutique fitness studio. The media attention had gradually faded as newer scandals emerged. Occasionally I still encountered people who recognized my name from the headlines, but the initial feeding frenzy had dissipated. What remained was just the reality of a fractured family finding new configurations. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Finished the final session with Dr. Brennan. Think I'm actually making progress on the whole, not everyone who loves me is trying to manipulate me thing." Derek and I had both started therapy after the hearing, his suggestion, surprisingly. He'd recognized that decades of systematic manipulation had left psychological scars that wouldn't heal simply because we'd won a legal battle. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Brennan, had helped me understand patterns I'd been carrying for years: hypervigilance about others' moods, chronic anxiety about being too much, difficulty accepting praise without suspecting hidden motives. "You were trained to doubt your own reality," Dr. Brennan had explained during one session. "That's what sustained manipulation does. It makes you question your perceptions, your needs, your right to establish boundaries. Recovery means rebuilding trust in your own judgment." The process was ongoing and often uncomfortable. But it was also liberating in ways I hadn't anticipated. I'd started painting again, not just the single self-portrait from months ago, but regularly, creating abstract pieces that expressed emotions I was still learning to articulate verbally. My penthouse had gradually filled with canvases, color seeping into the minimalist aesthetic I'd maintained for years. Rowena appeared in the museum atrium with 2 coffees from the cafe across the street. "Figured you'd need caffeine after the board presentation. How'd it go?" "They want us for future expansion projects," I said, accepting the cup gratefully. "Of course they do. We're brilliant." She surveyed the space with satisfaction. "This is exactly what we designed. No compromises, no watering down the vision. Feels good." "It does," I agreed. We stood in comfortable silence, admiring our work. Rowena had been instrumental not just in the professional realm but in helping me rebuild my sense of what healthy relationships looked like: reciprocal support without scorekeeping, honest feedback without manipulation, celebration of success without jealousy. My phone rang with Aunt Patricia's number. I'd been expecting her call. "The family gathering is still on for Sunday," she said when I answered. "About 20 people confirmed, mostly from your father's side, plus a few of your generation. Derek's bringing his new girlfriend, Amelia." "You're still coming?" "I'll be there," I confirmed. The Fitzgerald family reunions had resumed after decades of Constance-imposed separation. These gatherings were different from the Sutherland family events I'd grown up with, less performative, more genuine. People actually talked to each other rather than at each other. Achievements were celebrated without comparison. Conflicts were addressed directly rather than through passive-aggressive social maneuvering. "How are you doing with everything?" Patricia asked, her voice softening. "I know the plea agreement was finalized this week. Constance had accepted the deal rather than risk trial. she'd stood before a judge and formally admitted to felony theft from her children's trust funds. The moment had been surreal, my mother, always so concerned with social image, publicly acknowledging criminal behavior. I'd attended the hearing with Derek. Constance hadn't looked at either of us, maintaining her rigid dignity even in obvious disgrace. Penelope had been there, sitting alone in the back row, her expression unreadable. "I'm processing," I told Patricia honestly. "It's not satisfaction exactly. More like closure maybe? Or just exhaustion that it's finally resolved legally." "That's understandable. Justice doesn't always feel triumphant when it involves family." After we ended the call, I returned to my office at Hartley Associates. The space had expanded significantly. We'd taken over the adjacent suite and hired 3 new staff members to handle our growing project list. The Boulder Museum's success had generated considerable interest from other cultural institutions and commercial developers interested in sustainable design. Thomas knocked on my open door. "Client meeting in 15. The Aurora Public Library renovation project. They're bringing renderings from their architecture committee to show what they're hoping for." "I'll be ready," I said, pulling up the project files on my computer. This was my life now, focused on work I loved, surrounded by colleagues who respected my expertise, building something meaningful separate from family drama. The inheritance from Uncle Garrett sat mostly untouched in investment accounts Pemberton had helped me establish. I'd used some to expand the firm and fund a scholarship program for architecture students from underrepresented backgrounds, but the bulk remained as Uncle Garrett had intended: freedom, security, independence. The library meeting went well. As we were wrapping up, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Penelope. Can we talk? Not about money or the case. Just talk. I understand if you say no." I stared at the message for a long moment. My sister. The golden child whose perfection had been used as a weapon against me for decades. Who'd launched the social media campaign that had nearly destroyed my professional reputation. Who'd testified at the preliminary hearing about my supposed manipulation of Uncle Garrett. But also someone who'd been shaped by the same dysfunctional system, just from a different position within it. Someone who'd been taught her worth came from being superior to me rather than from her own inherent value. Someone who was now facing consequences of Constance's choices that she hadn't directly controlled. I typed back, "Coffee next week? Neutral location. Just us, no lawyers or family members." Her response came quickly, "Thank you. Yes. Wednesday afternoon?" We arranged details. I wasn't sure what Penelope wanted to discuss or whether reconciliation was even possible. But I was willing to listen, which felt like growth in itself. Not because I owed her anything, but because I was secure enough now to extend compassion without it costing me my boundaries. That evening, Derek came over for our weekly dinner, a tradition we'd established after the hearing. He brought Amelia, whom I'd met briefly at Patricia's last gathering. She was a graphic novelist with a dry sense of humor and an easy warmth that suggested she hadn't grown up in a family that required constant performance. "Natalie, this place is amazing," Amelia said, looking around my penthouse. "Derek mentioned you designed it yourself?" "Renovated," I clarified. "The bones were good, but I customized everything else: the open floor plan, the window configuration, the integrated workspace. And apparently started painting," Derek said, examining a new canvas I'd completed last week, abstract shapes in deep blues and golds. "This is good, not really good." "It's therapeutic more than artistic," I demurred. "Can't it be both?" Amelia suggested. "Creative expression doesn't have to choose between personal healing and aesthetic value." Over dinner, we talked about Derek's graphic design projects, Amelia's upcoming book release, my museum opening. Normal conversation between people who genuinely liked each other. No undercurrents of competition or judgment. No careful navigation around sensitive topics. Just authentic connection. I got an email from Penelope, Derek mentioned as we were cleaning up. "She wants to talk to me too." "Did she reach out to you?" "This afternoon. We're meeting Wednesday." "Are you nervous about it?" "A little," I admitted. I don't know what she wants or what I'm hoping for from the conversation. We were never really close, even before everything exploded. We were never allowed to be close, Derek corrected. Mom engineered competition instead of connection. But maybe now, without her controlling the narrative, we can figure out what kind of relationship we actually want with each other. The observation was characteristic of Derek's growth over the past months. He'd done serious work in therapy examining his role as the neutral family member and how that position had been its own form of survival strategy. He was learning to take positions, express opinions, establish boundaries, skills that had been systematically discouraged in our household. After Derek and Amelia left, I stood at my windows watching Denver's lights spread out below. The city looked different than it had 6 months ago, though nothing about the physical landscape had changed. What had shifted was my relationship to it, no longer a place where I was constantly managing others' perceptions, but simply where I lived and worked and built a life on my own terms. Uncle Garrett's letter sat framed on my desk now, a reminder of the gift he'd given me. Not just money, though that had been significant. But truth. Documentation. Permission to stop accepting unacceptable treatment. The inheritance had been both literal and metaphorical, financial resources and the validation that my perceptions of mistreatment had been accurate all along. My phone chimed with a notification, an email from the American Institute of Architects. The ethics complaint Constance had filed had been officially dismissed after investigation revealed it was part of a harassment campaign. The AIA chapter had also extended an invitation for me to speak at their next conference about sustainable institutional design. Small victories and ongoing progress. The museum opening next week would be a major milestone. The conversation with Penelope might lead to reconciliation or might simply provide closure on a relationship that couldn't be salvaged. Derek's continued therapy and healthy relationship suggested healing was possible for both of us. And Constance? She'd be living with the legal and financial consequences of her choices for years. I felt neither triumph nor grief about that, just a distant acknowledgement that accountability had finally arrived after decades of avoidance. The path forward remained uncertain in many ways. Criminal restitution would take years to fully collect. Family relationships would continue evolving in unpredictable directions. My own healing process was ongoing, with therapy uncovering layers of damage I hadn't fully recognized. But underneath the uncertainty lived something solid, a foundation rebuilt on truth rather than convenient fictions, on documented reality rather than manipulated narratives, on connections chosen freely rather than obligations enforced through guilt. Uncle Garrett had written in his letter that the inheritance was meant to provide freedom. 6 months later, I understood that freedom wasn't just financial independence. It was the liberation that came from finally trusting my own perceptions, establishing boundaries without guilt, and building a life that honored my authentic self rather than performing a version designed to earn conditional love. I picked up my paintbrush and approached a fresh canvas. I didn't have a specific vision in mind, just a feeling I wanted to express, something about emergence, about light breaking through previously solid structures, about the unexpected beauty that sometimes arose from necessary destruction. The painting that emerged over the next several hours was abstract but emotionally clear, sharp angles softening into curves, dark spaces gradually illuminated, rigid structures giving way to flowing forms. It wasn't technically perfect, but it was honest. And honesty, I'd learned, mattered more than perfection. As midnight approached, I stepped back from the completed work and felt a sense of rightness I'd rarely experienced before. Not happiness exactly, the situation was too complex and painful for simple happiness. But something deeper, authenticity. The alignment of my external life with my internal truth. Uncle Garrett's inheritance had given me the resources to fight for that alignment. The battle had been painful, costly, and public in ways I'd never wanted. But standing in my penthouse surrounded by evidence of the life I'd built, the architectural achievements, the genuine friendships, the creative expression, the hard-won self-knowledge, I recognized that the truest inheritance hadn't been money at all. It had been permission to finally value myself as much as I'd been taught to value everyone else's comfort and approval. Permission to stop accommodating abuse in the name of family loyalty. Permission to build something real on foundations of truth rather than continuing to maintain beautiful structures built on lies. The money had made the fight possible. But what made it worthwhile was the person I was becoming in its aftermath. Someone who could stand firm in her own worth, establish healthy boundaries, and create authentic connections without sacrificing her fundamental self. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The museum opening, the conversation with Penelope, the ongoing process of rebuilding relationships and healing old wounds. But tonight, I stood in the space I'd created for myself, literally and metaphorically, and felt something I'd spent decades searching for in all the wrong places. I felt at home in my own life, finally free to be exactly who I was meant to be. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Drop a comment telling us your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand up to family manipulation? You're not alone. Check out the recommended stories on your screen for more powerful narratives about reclaiming your life and finding your strength. Thanks for watching, and remember, your worth isn't determined by those who fail to see it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.